All right, we will go ahead and get started. My name, of course, is Chris Berry, and we do these weekly wisdom webinars to just provide education. We used to do workshops a lot of times in our office or one of our different satellite offices. So this is our way to almost have like a open office hours to talk legal, financial, and tax planning. And really, it is driven by you, your questions. I go ahead and answer. So if you do have questions, please put it into the question and answer section, and I'll go ahead and answer those. And I always like to start this with positive focus, something positive that happened the previous week. And for me, my kids are 10 and 8, and this is my first year coaching their soccer teams. So I played soccer from, well, soccer and basketball were my main things from probably kindergarten until I even played past college. I was playing indoor soccer and playing a lot of basketball. So sports have always been part of my life. And my dad was a coach for a lot of my upbringing. He coached me in soccer and basketball, and he was a coach at Oakland Community College. He coached a community college basketball team and coached my soccer team growing up. But now it's great to kind of passing it on to the next generation. So my dad's helping me with it, and it's great because not only it's my dad who coached me, but I'm also able to coach my son and daughter. And we had our first games this past Saturday. Unfortunately, we lost both, but kids had fun, still enjoy the game, and that's what's important at the end of the day. Not to say I'm one of those everyone gets a participation reward, but kids worked hard and it was great, especially since they've never played together as a team. So that was pretty cool. That was my positive focus. And we're looking forward to doing better maybe next week. So with that, all right, let's get into the questions and answers. Let me share my screens. Give me a second. So I got to hit this button. And this button. And this button. Whoops. Oh no, Zoom changed something on me. Plugin is required to share this. Interesting. All right, so give me a second as I'm updating because Zoom updated something on me. Technology is great, except for when they update it on you. But now we should be good, and we should be seeing my screen. So as always, this is general information. If you want to see how this applies to your specific situation, please make sure to reach out, schedule some time. Just mention that you were on the Wisdom webinar and we can schedule some time. Feel free to give our office a call at 844-885-4200, or you can actually book about 15 minutes online by going to 15chris.com, which forwards you to a calendar link. So if you want to see how this applies to your situation, please make sure to use those. With that, we'll go ahead and get into the questions. And again, if you do have a question and you did not submit one prior, well, I guess even if you did submit one prior and you don't see it here, I didn't capture it. But if you do have any questions, please put it in the question and answer. I do see a question coming in with regards to LLCs. So let me just make a note, LLCs. Okay, so a couple tax questions, income planning question, and then a legacy or estate planning question were submitted this previous week. So the first question was, how do I fund a Roth? So we've been talking about this idea of moving money into, or understanding different tax buckets, where we have things like your taxable buckets. This is where you pay tax on any growth potentially. Tax deferred. This is like your IRAs, 401ks. Income tax free. This is like your Roths, your IULs, cash value life insurance. And then we also have income and estate tax free. This is something we're talking more about as we get into Bernie Sanders just had his 99.5% bill. I forget exactly what it was called. It's like something like that. But what it's talking about is lowering that estate tax exemption to $3.5 million. where if you have more than $3.5 million, we need to figure out what are assets or what are ways that we can move assets to the estate tax-free bucket, not just the income tax-free. So Roths fit in over here. They're in that tax-free bucket where the growth on the Roths grow tax-free, along with cash value life insurance, IUL, index universal life insurance, 529s, HSAs. So how do I fund my Roth? Really, there's two main ways to get money into a Roth. One is through Roth contributions, and there's certain rules around this. And then the other is with regards to Roth conversions. Okay. And again, I'm not saying Roths are always the route to go, but they're the simplest to understand if you're looking to get money into this tax-free bucket. Most people at least have a simple basic understanding of what a Roth is and how it's invested in the market, and it can grow tax-free. There's more advanced techniques, but at least we should understand a Roth because it's the simplest, and a lot of times it's the starting point of trying to create more tax-free income. Now, there's two ways to get money into the Roth. One is contributions, and contributions can only be done up to 6,000, or depending on how old you are, if you're falling into the catch-up provisions, you can only contribute $7,000 to a Roth IRA. If your employer offers a Roth contribution, you can contribute more to the Roth, but you are going to have contribution limits, and you're also going to have income limits on how much you can contribute to a Roth. And typically when we're talking about contributions to a Roth, a contribution, and I'll use different colors. So, whoops, if we're talking about contributions, contributions are typically from a taxable bucket over to the tax-free. So this actually gets into the second question. I actually broke the question out when someone submitted it into two. Really, these are the same question of how do I get money into a Roth? So one would be through contribution. So to answer this question, yes, you can do a contribution from a post-tax money market checking savings, okay? So if you have, say, $7,000 sitting in your savings account, plus whatever emergency fund, whatever else, you can move that $7,000, move it to a Roth if via a contribution. You do have to have earned income. You have to be working to be able to contribute to the Roth. So you have to have earned income, just like to contribute to an IRA, you have to have earned income, not income from like properties or something like that. It has to be like earned income from wages. And then again, there's an income test where if you make too much in terms of income, which is roughly about $208,000 of income as joint married filing jointly, you're income barred from contributing to a Roth. You cannot contribute to a Roth. So there's certain restrictions around the contributions. But think about it like this: once you retire, you can't make contributions anymore, okay? So then we have to focus on Roth conversions. So with Roth conversions, you can convert as much as you want, okay? All you have to do is pay the tax, okay? So if you wanted to do a $200,000 Roth conversion, you can do that. And what a Roth conversion is taking money from the tax deferred account and now moving it to the Roth. So we move the money from an IRA, pay the tax, and then now we have the money sitting in the Roth. Now, when we do a conversion, the best way to maximize the amount in the tax-free bucket is to pay the tax out of the taxable account, right? So let's say we wanted to do a $200,000 conversion and we wanted this $200,000 now to be inside of the Roth, right? That's maximizing the amount in this tax-free bucket, which for a variety of reasons, and we've touched upon this numerous times, makes a lot of sense if you think taxes are going up in the future. So if we're to move 200,000 from pre-tax to tax-free, obviously the tax has to be paid on. So ideally the tax is paid out of your taxable account. So I can't do math in my head, but let's say we're doing a $200,000 conversion. Maybe the tax on that is $40,000. Okay. We pay the tax from the taxable accounts. That allows us to get the full 200,000 in the Roth. That's the ideal way if we are doing a Roth conversion to maximize the amount in the tax-free account. But alternatively, we could really have the tax paid from the IRA as well. But instead of having 200,000 sitting in the tax-free account, we would have roughly 160,000 if we're moving roughly the same amount, just ballpark. So, but if you're looking at maximizing the amount in the tax-free account, then ideally you'd want the tax paid out of checking savings. You wouldn't want the tax paid out of the conversion amount. So those are the two ways to get money into a Roth. Keep in mind, a Roth is not the only tax-free vehicle. And I'm not saying it's the best or worst or any better or any worse than any others. It's just one of the tools. We have other tax-free vehicles, things like cash value life insurance, health savings accounts, 529s. All of those are tax-free. And then something to remember is that a Roth is not tax-free for estate tax purposes. So if you are getting into this $3.5 million asset range, and you're looking at what am I going to leave in terms of a legacy, we might want to focus on things that are income and estate tax free. And this is where we could have things like irrevocable life insurance trusts. And we have other strategies that are available right now. So if you do have an estate that's going to be greater than $3.5 million, there's a limited window of opportunity before either Biden or Sanders gets any of their plans through, or when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires, which is in 2025. So those were two kind of Roth conversion, Roth contribution questions. Again, it's a good idea to understand these different tax buckets: taxable, tax deferred, tax free. Too often I sit down with clients, they've saved all their money in a 401k pre-tax, and all of their money is sitting in tax deferred, where there's no tax diversification. If taxes go up, the value goes down. A couple of questions here that came in with regards to the Roths. How about converting 200,000 from a 401k to a Roth? You're going to have to, it's going to depend on the plan administrator. Worst case, we would roll 200,000 or roll money from the 401k out to an IRA and then do a Roth conversion. If your employer allows for Roth contributions while you're working, I would explore that, because you could contribute, not convert, contribute up to roughly 19,000 and change to a Roth 401k. But when we're looking at moving money into a Roth IRA, typically we're moving that from an IRA to a Roth IRA. And a lot of times, if you still have money at a traditional 401k, we would roll that money from the 401k out to an IRA, and then we would facilitate the Roth conversions. Are the earnings you make on the Roth taxed? The answer is no. From an income standpoint, that's what makes that tax-free bucket so nice, is that anything in the tax-free bucket, whether it's a Roth, whether it's cash value life insurance, whether it's 529s, which have to be used for education, or health savings accounts, anything that grows inside of that Roth is income tax free. It's not estate tax free if you have an estate tax issue, but it is income tax free. So the gains are tax free, unlike the taxable bucket. The taxable bucket, you may have capital gains or income tax on the gains. And I say may because there's certain exceptions. Depending on the amount of income, your capital gains might not get taxed. Depending on if you're looking at leaving this to the next generation, you might get step up in basis. So the kids or beneficiaries wouldn't pay any tax on the gains. So the taxable account is sometimes taxed. The tax deferred account is always taxed. And the tax-free account, Roth, from an income standpoint, is never taxed, other than it could be estate tax. More questions coming in on this. Should the tax paid for conversion to Roth be included in your overall tax return that year? The answer is yes. You do have to pay the tax. So if you convert 100,000, that's going to be roughly, say, $20,000 to $30,000 worth of additional income that's going to show up on your tax return. And a lot of people, prior to maybe the last 10 years, the old thinking was you would always want to defer paying taxes as long as possible. But now that we know taxes are going up in the future, I would rather pay more tax now while tax rates are lower versus paying a higher tax on those pre-tax accounts. So again, one of the biggest risks and biggest opportunities, and it's a window of opportunity that's closing, is looking at moving money out of those IRAs, whether we're moving it to Roth, whether we're moving it to cash value life insurance, whether we're moving it even to a taxable account. A big issue, again, I can't stress this enough. If you have more than, say, $250,000 of pre-tax dollars, you need to think about diffusing that ticking tax time bomb. Another question, why isn't a Roth IRA tax-free for a state? Doesn't person who inherit Roth skip paying taxes if under 3.5 million? So the Roth is income tax free to the next generation. So when they inherit it, they do not have to pay any tax. But the Roth IRA factors into the estate tax. And so the way the estate tax works is if you have less than X amount of dollars, the government is going to take another swipe of your assets. So IRAs, if you have more than $3.5 million, could be double taxed. Not only taxed on the income for the kids who inherit it, but also estate taxed as well. So the way estate taxes work, right now, the exemption is $11 million. So as long as you have less than $11 million, you don't have to worry about estate taxes. And likewise, your Roths would not be taxed. You would not have an estate tax on your Roths if your estate currently is valued at less than $11 million. Well, this is only going to run until the Tax Cuts or Jobs Act expires, which is scheduled for 2025, but Biden has ran on a proposal repealing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So what that means is that it's just a matter of time where now this is dropping down to $5 million, okay? So again, if you have Roths and you leave it to the next generation and your overall estate, your life insurance, your real estate is less than $5 million, you're not going to owe any tax on your Roth, nor will you owe any estate tax. And then this, we have the Bernie Sanders Biden tax proposal that just came about, I think March 25th. They've talked about lowering the estate tax exemption even further to 3.5 million. And so if you were to add up the total value of the estate and counting your Roths, it's greater than $3.5 million. Let's say it's $4 million. Now a chunk of this, whether it's Roth or not, is going to get taxed at up to additional 40%. Okay. So I'm not saying Roths are bad. I'm just saying that we need to understand that, yes, they're income tax free and they make a lot of sense in terms of your retirement income, but depending on the size of your estate, Roths might not be the best option to leave things to the next generation. We would have to look at tools that could leave things estate tax free as well as income tax free. All right. So that is all the questions I had email and submitted on the Roths. And again, Roth is not the only tax-free vehicle. It's just probably the most common, easiest to understand. Depending on your goals, we might want to look at different directions, like cash value life insurance, which can be an increased death benefit that's estate tax-free, can be a long-term care benefit as well, and tax-free income. All right, number 3, I am 66, my wife is 68 and already taking Social Security. Should I take mine now or wait? As an attorney and fiduciary and having to always act in someone's best interest, I have to give you that boring answer. It depends. Okay, depends on a lot of different factors. But one of the things that we do, and this is important in terms of creating an income plan in retirement. One of the things we need to do is look at Social Security optimization. All right. And what we can do is, if we have some basic information, like what is your Social Security at full, what would it be at full retirement age, the dollar amount, and then just looking into life expectancy, we can actually run the numbers to see what is the way to maximize your lifetime payout from Social Security. Because if you don't have a lot of longevity in your family and you're planning at pass away age 75 versus living to 100, well, that's going to affect maybe when we should take Social Security. But this simple question of when to take Social Security actually affects a lot of different things. Because while on its face, it's affecting your income, also a big thing when we're talking about Social Security optimization is, if you turn on Social Security now, what effect will that have on your tax plan, right? So let's say you retire at 66, maybe your wife's already taking Social Security. So just big picture, one option is you flip on Social Security now. Okay? And that might be the right answer from a Social Security optimization standpoint, if I'm looking at maximize the dollars I pull from Social Security, but it may not make sense from an overall plan standpoint, because if we flip on Social Security now, well, guess what? That creates more income. And if we're talking about doing things like Roth conversions, or moving money to cash value life insurance, or just diffusing that ticking tax time bomb on the IRA, well, that gives us less room to pull money out of that IRA, right? Because now if we have additional income, that's going to affect the tax brackets, and that means there's less we can pull out of those IRAs when we know taxes are going to be sooner. So if you flip on Social Security at 66, understand now we have additional income, versus if we were to wait, we could use age 66 to age 72, when now we're forced to take money out of those RMD or IRAs. That could be years we could be pulling additional money out of the IRA, A, to cover any income needs that you have, but then also B, to diffuse that ticking tax time bomb in those pre-tax accounts, and C, it allows your Social Security to continue to grow at roughly 8%. And then by understanding when we're going to start drawing on the IRAs, that ties into our investment plan as well, right? So if we know we're going to be drawing on accounts sooner rather than later, maybe it should be invested a little bit different. So this is I get a lot of different scenarios of ages, and I think there's a study, there's about 857 different combinations, especially with married couples, of how to structure Social Security. And we have some sophisticated software to run different proposals, different options to maximize Social Security. But the key thing is to understand that it fits into this overall plan of, yeah, obviously it's going to be an income plan in retirement, but also, and this is a big opportunity, is, okay, that's going to help define what is our tax plan. And then the third piece of it is, okay, now we're going to know how to structure those investments. So Social Security is it's very easy to just make a decision and flip on the switch, but there's actually a lot that goes into it. All right. So that's Social Security. Number 4, do I need a trust to avoid probate? The answer is no. So with regards to transferring assets upon death, there's 4 ways assets transfer. One is through joint ownership. So joint between a husband and a wife, or joint between anyone else, joint ownership with right of survivorship. Second would be through beneficiary designations. So you have a beneficiary of your life insurance, your 401k, your IRA. Third would be through a trust, and this is the route a lot of people go. But if an asset doesn't pass to one of the first 3, then it ends up in probate. And that's what we want to try to avoid at the end of the day. So do we need a trust to avoid probate? The answer is no. But depending on the situation, we might want to trust. One of those reasons why we might want to trust is asset protection. So protection from creditors and long-term care costs. Another reason we might want to trust, protect the kids or beneficiaries. Another reason we might want to trust is helps keep things organized. Everything goes into one spot, right? Some reasons why we might not want to trust: a little more costly to set up, so more of an investment. A little more complicated. And really, it's just about figuring out what your goals are, developing the best strategy. It's not tied to the size of your assets or your estate. Really, at the end of the day, it's all about what is your goal. If you want to organize things, you want to protect your assets, you want to make sure what you leave to the next generation is protected, probably want to trust. If you're looking at, okay, what is the least amount of investment? What's the simplest thing to do? Maybe you don't want to trust, but that's where we sit down with clients, figure out what is their goal, and then we develop the best strategies. And then, and only then do we get into talking about tools. So do I need a trust to avoid probate? No, but you might want to trust for other reasons. All right, this was a question that was submitted. Are LLCs protected from lawsuits? And if yes, should they be in a castle trust? So this seems like a simple question, but it's a little more complicated than it appears, just like a lot of these things. You can go on the internet and see a simple answer to a simple question, but when you actually dig down into the details in the financial, legal, tax planning world, there's lots of different exceptions, and it's a little more nuanced than it may appear. So are LLCs asset protected? Typically, yes. Okay, so when we're talking about asset protection, we never want to make any guarantees. There could always be what we call bad fact cases where you don't follow the rules of the LLC or the asset protection trusts. So never want to make any guarantees. But that said, my 15 years, all of our LLCs and trusts have stood the test of time. So what is a LLC? It's a limited liability company. So a LLC is a limited liability company. So that means it has to have some type of business interest. And a lot of times we're using LLCs for like second pieces of real estate, that type of thing. So think of an LLC kind of like a box. And typically we're using it when we're dealing with hot assets. So a hot asset would be, let's say, a rental property, right? We have this rental property, and then let's say you have your own personal assets over here. You have your home over here in your name, and you have your investments over here, right? And then you have this rental property, and we call rental properties or business interests, they're hot assets, right? We never know when there might be a slip and fall, and now you're sued because of that. And we don't want that liability coming over to you, right? So instead, what we do is we might drop that hot assets into an LLC, a limited liability company. So now if there's some type of issue because of that hot asset, it can't boil over into your own personal assets. So a lot of times we do this with like rental properties. Now, let's also understand that that's one direction of liability, right? So by setting up that LLC, we don't want the LLC coming after you. So by setting up the LLC, we've protected ourselves from that liability, right? Now, the other form of liability is something that's caused by you. So this could be two big things. One would be a lawsuit. Let's say you got in a car accident, right? And you were sued, or you hit a school bus full of kids. Because of your own action, someone or some entity can come after you personally. Now, if you own that LLC in your name, that's no different than owning Coca-Cola stock. So they would be able to come after your LLC. So a LLC does not protect against your personal liability. Or the big one, not only lawsuits, but the big one is long-term care cost to the tune of the $8,000 to $12,000 per month that a nursing home runs. If you have an LLC, they might force you to sell that LLC to liquidate your interest because it's a countable asset. It's no different than a creditor, right? So that's why not only do we do LLCs, but we also set up castle trust or asset protection trust to protect your personal assets, your personal liability. All right. So by setting up the LLC, we've insulated against the hot assets. And then by setting up the castle trust, we have now protected the LLC from lawsuits, creditors, et cetera. And so at the end of the day, yes, we would have your asset protection trust to protect against personal liability. We put things like your home in here, your investments can go in here, and your LLCs can go in here, right? And we wouldn't want just the rental property in here, because if something happens and it's inside the, whoops. So if something happens to that rental property that's inside of the trust, now they could come after everything inside of the trust, right? So that's why we would have the LLC inside of the trust. Oops, let me draw it this way. So now that hot asset, like a business or real estate, would be wrapped inside of the protection of the LLC. And because it's in the trust, it's protected from your own personal liability. So hopefully that answered the question. Yes, when we're doing LLCs, we're also looking at asset protection trusts, because there's two forms or two directions for that liability. We have a asset protection trust. How much does it cost to have your firm qualify us for Medicaid if one of the spouses goes into the nursing home and we want to protect our assets for the well spouse and the children? So when we set up a castle trust or asset protection trust, one of the goals is to make it 5 years before we need any type of nursing home care. And then if we have, then everything inside of that trust would be protected from that nursing home or Medicaid spend down. So ideally, if everything gets funded into the trust and we have all the assets in the trust and we make it 5 years, and then all of a sudden we have a stroke or need nursing home care, then 100% of what's inside of the trust would be protected from that nursing home or Medicaid spend down. So we wouldn't charge anything, because there really isn't anything to do. All you have to do is fill out a 4-page Medicaid application. So that's one of the advantages of setting things up ahead of time, of planning ahead, is that if you were to need nursing home care, everything is structured so that ideally it's just a simple Medicaid application and then you're done. Very different than doing nothing and having our firm try to scramble at the last minute to do Medicaid crisis planning, which easily could add up to 2.5 months worth of nursing home costs for us to do it. Because now, instead of a 4-page or 6-page Medicaid application, now when we have to do a Medicaid crisis plan, a lot of times it's 150 pages of documents that we have to submit along with the Medicaid application, documenting every step of this confusing, crazy, illogical process to get someone qualified for Medicaid within that 5-year look back period. So again, the goal is the earlier we start thinking about these things, the earlier we start putting things in place, the more options we're going to have and the better outcomes at a lot less of an investment. So that is all the questions I have submitted. So if you do have a question or something floating around in your head, I still have some time left. Feel free to put that either into the Q&A section or the chat section, and we'll give it just another minute. And in the meantime, I will be thinking about what we're doing for practice tonight with my under 11 boys. Question, what if we don't have a castle trust? How much does it cost to qualify for Medicaid? Doing the Medicaid crisis planning, typically you're looking at a fee for us to do it of about 2 to 3 months worth of nursing home care. And it kind of depends on single versus married, but it's much more cost effective to set up a castle trust ahead of time versus us having to do that Medicaid crisis plan. And the investment might sound like a lot, but if I can save $200,000, $300,000 from going to a nursing home at the last minute, then it's going to be the best investment you've ever made if you are in that situation. So again, much prefer to do the planning ahead of time, protect things. It's a lot simpler, a lot more cost effective, but I completely understand there's procrastination, and sometimes I have families say, hey, I wish that we knew about you years ago. So we don't like to do the Medicaid crisis planning, but we understand that we have to do it, and we'd much prefer to plan ahead, because then we can protect more, much simpler. All right, any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Try to stay warm out there. I was out there coaching soccer last night, and it was freezing. A warm shower felt amazing. It's one of the joys in life. But with that, I want to thank everyone. All right, make it a great week. Take care.